As of today, I have been working for 1000 days on this game. Oh, that's not even the text on the screen. Yeah, I'm not doing this again. Looking back, what surprises me the most isn't that I suddenly decided to become a game developer or even how much of my life this project would consume. It's that for most of those 1000 days, I didn't actually know what game I was making. Today, I have a game with awesome movement mechanics and this goofy little character called Harry. But for the longest time, this little dude was performing the craziest parkour and slamming his body into stuff, but it was never clear why he did any of that. I should have known, but I was in way over my head. This game was never meant to exist. I never planned on becoming a game developer. This all started by accident. One day I was sitting on a train, I was bored, and the thought popped into my head, hey, why not make a game? I'm not kidding, that's the entire backstory. 2 weeks later and several masterful games made in Scratch, I had Unity downloaded and not the slightest idea that this would become a defining period of my life. So, how did it all start? After I downloaded Unity, I did what probably everyone would do. You know, followed some tutorials, I learned how to make a block falling game, stuff like that. But very soon I said, okay, time to stop just following tutorials and just make something. I don't think I planned to make an actual game at the time. My idea was to just mess around a bit inside the editor. So yeah, I wanted to make something. I had absolutely no idea yet what something was going to be, and I'm afraid that that is a theme that would follow me over many of the next 1000 days. So how did I decide what to make in my first Unity project? All I knew initially was that I wanted to make a bouncy playable character. How did I get this idea, you ask? Well, don't laugh, but sometimes when I can't sleep, I imagine I'm on a super strong pogo stick and I'm bouncing just 20 meters into the air, and even though I'm actually rather afraid of heights, this is somehow calming. I needed some direction for a game, and I guess that was enough. So let's rewind 1000 days. This was how it looked in the beginning. I had this little guy here with a little jetpack. Moving around was pretty much all I was doing at that point. It was decently fun, and I figured why not expand the movement a little bit. First came what no game has ever done before, a grappling system, but I think I accidentally gave it a unique twist. When I was setting up the grapple, I had to decide where on the character it will be connected. For some reason, I decided to put it on the very bottom of the character, and all of a sudden, it really mattered how you aligned yourself when grappling. And this already gave quite a bit of nuance to this mechanic. There was an actual skill ceiling now, and more importantly, it kept me constantly engaged. Without realizing it, I had just established one of the first major parts of the game's identity. From that point onwards, almost every new movement mechanic was built around that same principle. Anyways, I had the first little playable prototype and I said, hey, this is fun, let's keep going. After that, I just experimented for a few months. And yes, I mean it when I say months. Today, I get a bit anxious when I look at how long my first game is taking me. On the other hand, I realized that a lot of the time was spent on experimentation, iteration, and refinement. Today, I am super proud at how satisfying the movement in my game has become. But I don't think this would have been possible if I didn't allow myself to really experiment and find what works. One of the biggest early changes was replacing the jetpack with a single boost. This made the game much more deliberate, and I just kept getting new ideas for movement mechanics. At some point, I played the Rogue Prince of Persia, and I became fascinated by its wall running mechanic. I loved how much control and creativity the game gave you. That inspired me to add wall sliding into my game. Sometime later, I stumbled across another mechanic completely by accident. The end result was a slingshot. This mechanic was so ridiculously fun that I genuinely worried that it would just make every other movement mechanic feel boring. But the exact opposite happened. The slingshots was incredibly fun on its own, but it became even more satisfying when you combined it with the other mechanics. For example, slinging yourself into a perfect double wall slide just feels so incredible to pull off. The game turned more and more into a parkour experience, and chaining stuff together just felt incredible. This also became a huge part of the game's identity. I genuinely felt like I was onto something, but there was one big problem. Yes, I had figured out the movement, but I still hadn't figured out the game. Nothing you did inside the game had any context whatsoever. You just parkoured around like a maniac. But why? I had no answer to that. I guess that's not too surprising. I mean, this whole project originally started as a way to learn Unity. Months later, I had a movement system that was genuinely fun, but that was pretty much all I had. Even my main character wasn't really figured out yet. My early designs were about as generic as you can imagine. Look, if you turn this one upside down, it kind of looks like a fighter jet. The game had no setting, so I just started to draw some random figures on bouncy looking devices. Eventually, I doodled up this little orange guy. The funny thing is that even after creating and naming him Harry, I still had absolutely no idea what he actually was. And neither did anyone else. The first people to play the game called him a potato, an orange, a worm, a maraca, a baby rattle, and a few things I'm definitely not saying out loud or the video will get age restricted. So, let's summarize. I had a game with a great movement system, a goofy orange character with no identity, a bunch of random art assets, and still no idea what the final game was supposed to be. Well, I thought I had found the answer once enough people started playing early versions, but looking back, it turned out to be the completely wrong conclusion, and it probably cost me months of development. The first thing people noticed was that controlling Harry was rough. He wasn't snappy at all. He was clumsy, he was wobbly and constantly falling over. At that point, some people even started calling it a rage game. And honestly, I can see where they're coming from. I think at that point I was simply too used to the controls already. Harry is not easy to control, and this is by design. But the controls back then were simply too unrefined. So does that mean it actually was a rage game? Well, judging by the frustration by some players, I guess maybe, but there was another pattern I kept noticing. Once players started figuring Harry out, the frustration often turned into excitement. And I cannot believe what comes next because I was about to do some real mental gymnastics. I said to myself, what if this actually is a rage game, but only in disguise? I figured that simply marketing this as another platformer would give the game almost no chance to get noticed. Rage games, on the other hand, are almost made for YouTube and Twitch. So my thought process was, make a rage game that gets players and especially content creators in because they want to experience some suffering, and then be surprised with how satisfying the movement actually is. And this just sent me down the wrong path, and I think in the end this is what made me lose so much time on the game. And while I actually think that it can work as a rage game, I don't think the answer is to make it a rage game only. Let me show you what I mean by comparing two versions of the game that both got playtested by people. Version 0.3 had checkpoints, and new mechanics were introduced fairly quickly. It was still a very difficult game, but nonetheless, the reception was honestly fantastic. Even some people who normally don't enjoy difficult games told me that they struggled to put the game down.
Oh my god, that is so cool.
People got so locked in, they felt cool as hell when they pulled off some crazy moves. It was beautiful to see.
God, I'm a pro gamer, holy shit.
Unfortunately, I was still convinced the game needed to become a proper rage game. And checkpoints didn't really fit that vision. And a few months later, I had built version 0.5. This version was much closer to a traditional rage climber. Instead of progressing through checkpoints, players had to climb one giant level. My idea was to turn the entire level into one massive playground. The higher you climbed, the more opportunities you had to combine mechanics, discover new routes, and approach obstacles in a different way. I even added a progression system. Players could collect tokens and then use those to unlock shortcuts through the level and even buy additional movement abilities. Looking back, I don't think I ever believed the fun was reaching the top. The fun was always the climbing, just playing the game. And without realizing it, I assumed everyone else would feel the same way. I thought players would look past the frustration, discover the movement, and eventually love climbing just as much as I did. And you know what? For a small group of players, that's exactly what happened. But even if there was a promise of great movement past all of the struggle, it also turned off a lot of players. And I think I have the perfect case study to prove my point. Let's take streamer Lunatic as an example. He played both versions. When he played version 0.3, I think he had a fantastic time. I initially told him that the game was sort of a rage game with checkpoints, and he was like, "No, I don't play rage games, but I love platformers." To my surprise, he played it, and I have to say, he was also one of the best players I have ever seen. A few months later, he also played version 0.5. By then, he already knew how satisfying the movement could be, but repeatedly losing progress simply wasn't his version of fun. He quit early. When I compared both versions, one thing became incredibly clear. Both games promised the exact same satisfying movement, but players were willing to endure so much more frustration in version 0.3. The only real difference? Checkpoints. That's all it took. They shifted the player's focus away from the punishment and towards the satisfying movement. Ironically, I think the movement mechanics work incredibly well in a rage climber. But more on that in a bit, because believe it or not, but this chapter is still not completely closed. This realization completely changed how I thought about the game. Instead of trying to force it into a box, to try and somehow make it into a compelling rage game, I needed to let the game become whatever it wanted to become. And yeah, my biggest takeaway from all of this became my new design philosophy for the entire game now. Celebrate the movement. But that left me with one final question. If the movement is the star of the game, then what's the best way to showcase it? A structured linear platformer with checkpoints or an open rage climber? Yeah, I think the answer is kind of obvious by now. There was just one problem, because by then I had spent months building the rage climber. Throwing all of that away terrified me. I had already spent over 2 years on this project, but I also wanted the game to become the best and truest version of itself. And more than that, I genuinely loved playing this version, and the people who are into rage games also enjoyed it. So I decided to make 2 separate game modes. But before I explain what they are, I should probably explain who Harry actually is, because the game finally has a context. And I think this was the biggest relief I've had since I started the game, because it's so hard to design anything without a context in mind. There is no direction for art, for the pacing, and so on. Everything I built before was always resting on some degree of uncertainty. Will this even make sense later on? Will I have to redo everything again? I feel like the moment I found the actual setting for the game, everything else just fell into place. Here is what's actually going on. You play as Harry, and Harry is a worm. And he is on a quest to become what's called a leaper, which is essentially a highly trained worm athlete who uses mobility gear to do parkour and overcome the naturally imposed disadvantages of being a worm. But in order to become a leaper, every worm has to beat a certified training gym. And as it turns out, your uncle has just built one. Unfortunately for him, however, a gym cannot be certified until a student completes it. Since your uncle is already a professional leaper, he can't do it himself. Your parents have dropped you off for the day, and without anyone asking, your uncle has basically volunteered you, and now you have no choice but to beat the whole thing. Look, I get it. It's not exactly Shakespeare, but after more than 2 years of having absolutely zero context for the game, I'm super happy with this. Now, back to the question from before. What should the game actually be? The answer ended up being 2 different experiences. The first one is the gym. This will be recommended as the first game mode to start with. It's a mostly linear experience with checkpoints, designed to gradually teach every movement mechanic. Each section of the gym introduces a new mechanic or 2 on their own, and then asks you to combine it with everything you have learned before. Finally, each section ends with a large open trial. In a way, I guess these are my game's boss fights. These trials lets players solve the challenge in their own way. There is more than one way to reach the top. If a player struggles in one section, they can simply try another route. And yes, from the outside, these trials might look like they're straight out of a Rage Climber. But that's not really the point. Yes, players will lose progress here. And yes, they will probably get frustrated, but the primary goal isn't to make them suffer. It's to create spaces where players naturally fall into that state of flow and just have fun. And once they have found their rhythm, they will start to move very quickly through this space. So that is the first game mode. I'm also planning on making the second game mode, which I'm currently just calling the Big Leap. In this mode, you start with every movement mechanic the game has to offer. However, it's one enormous interconnected level. There are countless ways to fall back down, and there are no checkpoints. And I guess this can definitely be considered a rage game mode, but I think it really depends on how you approach it. This is not supposed to be where new players start. When you launch the game, the gym will be presented as the intended first experience. The Big Leap will come with a warning that basically says, hey, if you haven't finished the gym yet, you are signing up for a rage-inducing experience. If you love rage games and this is the game you want, then go ahead and start with this mode. But assuming someone already played and finished the first game mode, then things will shift dramatically. Yes, it will still be very tough, probably tougher than the first game mode overall, but at the same time, it will be a giant, awesome playground where you can really get creative and just go nuts with the movement. So, where is the game now? Well, it's still nowhere near finished, but for the first time since I started this project 1000 days ago, it finally feels like I'm building the game instead of searching for it. Looking back, I think I spent the first 2 years not only figuring out how to make games in the first place, but also trying to figure out what this game wanted to be. Now, development is moving faster along than it ever has. Since June, I have been building the gym. The plan is for it to have at least 5, maybe 6 or even 7 sections, and the first 3 are already structurally finished and have been playtested. As for the second game mode, I'll probably end up rebuilding most of it from scratch, and honestly, I'm pretty excited to do it. As for wishlists, well, the reality is that there are barely any. Based purely on the numbers, the game probably won't have a successful launch, but honestly, I'm absolutely okay with that. It's an absolute joy to make the game, and I love playing it. So, whatever comes from it, I'm just happy that I made it. Well, I still technically haven't made it, right? But yeah, we're gonna get there. If you like what you have seen and if you want to help to give Keep Leapin a chance, I'd really appreciate if you wishlist it on Steam. Link below. By the way, it also runs wonderfully on the Steam Deck. And if you'd like to follow the rest of the journey, then, you can stick around on the channel. As always, thanks for watching, Shy Claire, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.